Maria Santos walked through the heavy rain that Tuesday evening, her worn-out shoes completely soaked as she made her way to the bus stop. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the city hospital, and every bone in her body ached with exhaustion. At 32 years old, she felt like she had lived several lifetimes already. Her hands, which once moved gracefully across ivory keys, now spent their days changing bandages, checking vital signs, and holding the hands of dying patients. She reached into her pocket and counted the few coins she had left. The rent was due in 3 days, and she was still short by $200. Her younger brother needed his school fees paid, and her mother's medication was running low. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had learned long ago that crying solved nothing. Life had taught her that lesson many times. The bus finally arrived, splashing dirty water onto the already wet sidewalk. Maria climbed aboard and found a seat near the back. She stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, each one representing a life she would never know. Somewhere in those tall buildings, people were eating dinner with their families, laughing at jokes, and planning vacations. Maria could not remember the last time she had taken a day off. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her nursing supervisor asking if she could take on an extra assignment. A wealthy patient needed round-the-clock care at his private residence, and they were offering 3 times the normal pay. Maria's heart jumped at the numbers on the screen. This could solve so many of her problems. Without hesitation, she typed back her acceptance. The next morning, Maria arrived at an address in the most expensive part of the city. She had never been to this neighborhood before, only seen it in magazines and television shows. The houses here were not really houses at all. They were mansions, each one bigger than the entire apartment building where she lived. She checked the address twice, certain she had made a mistake. The iron gates opened automatically as she approached, and a long driveway led her toward a house that looked like something from a fairy tale. Gardens stretched out on either side, perfectly maintained with flowers of every color. A fountain stood in the center of the circular driveway, water dancing in the morning sunlight. Maria felt like she had stepped into another world entirely. A butler met her at the door. His name was Thomas, and he had worked for the Harrison family for over 40 years. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He led Maria through the entrance hall, past paintings that probably cost more than she would earn in her entire lifetime, and up a grand staircase that curved elegantly toward the 2nd floor. The patient was Edward Harrison, 78 years old, one of the wealthiest men in the country. He had built his fortune in real estate and investments, turning a small inheritance into an empire worth billions. But money, as Maria would soon learn, could not buy everything. Edward had suffered a severe stroke 3 months ago, and while he had survived, he was now confined to a wheelchair and needed constant medical attention. Thomas opened the door to a large bedroom suite. The curtains were drawn, keeping the room in a state of perpetual twilight. In the corner, sitting in a wheelchair near the window, was Edward Harrison. He was thinner than Maria had expected, his once powerful frame now frail and diminished. But his eyes, when they turned to look at her, still held a sharp intelligence that time and illness had not managed to steal. Maria introduced herself professionally, explaining her qualifications and experience. Edward listened without speaking, his gaze never leaving her face. When she finished, he simply nodded and turned back to the window. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply sad about this man, something that went beyond his physical condition. Over the following days, Maria established a routine. She arrived each morning at 7, checked Edward's vital signs, administered his medications, and helped him with his physical therapy exercises. He rarely spoke, responding to her questions with short answers or simple gestures. The other staff members warned her that he had been this way since his stroke. Before the illness, they said, he had been different. He had been full of life, always laughing, always planning something new. The stroke had taken more than his mobility. It had stolen his spirit. Maria noticed the grand piano in the corner of the living room during her 2nd week. It was a black and gleaming, positioned near large windows that overlooked the garden. She found herself staring at it during her breaks, her fingers itching with a familiar longing. She had not touched a piano in over 10 years, not since the night that had changed everything. One afternoon, while helping Edward with his afternoon medication, he caught her looking at the piano through the open door. His eyes followed her gaze, and for the first time since she had arrived, he seemed genuinely curious about something. Edward asked her if she played. The question came out rough, his speech still affected by the stroke, but Maria understood him perfectly. She felt her heart begin to race, a cold sweat forming on her palms. She shook her head quickly, perhaps too quickly, and said she did not know how. It was a lie, and from the way Edward looked at her, she suspected he knew it was a lie. The days turned into weeks, and Maria settled into her new routine. The extra money allowed her to pay off some debts and finally buy her mother a full month's supply of medication. Her brother was able to stay in school, and for the first time in years, Maria did not have to choose between eating dinner and paying for electricity. But something was changing. She found herself looking forward to her days at the Harrison mansion, not just for the money, but for something else she could not quite name. Despite his silence, Edward had a presence that drew her in. She began to understand that his quietness was not coldness. It was grief. He was grieving for the life he had lost, for the man he used to be. One evening, while Maria was preparing to leave for the night, Edward wheeled himself to the doorway of the living room. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the piano, before turning to look at her. His eyes were wet with tears he was trying hard to hold back. He told her that the piano had belonged to his wife. Her name was, and she had been the love of his life. She had passed away 2 years ago, just before his stroke. Since then, no one had touched the instrument. The house staff kept it dusted and tuned, but it sat silent, waiting for hands that would never return. Maria felt her own eyes filling with tears. She understood loss. She understood what it meant to have something precious taken away without warning. She sat down beside Edward and listened as he began to talk, really talk, for the first time since she had known him. Had been a concert pianist in her youth, Edward explained. They had met at one of her performances 45 years ago. He had been a young businessman, ambitious and driven, with no time for art or music. But the moment he heard her play, something inside him shifted. He fell in love with her before the concert was even over, before he had even spoken a single word to her. Their courtship was long and filled with obstacles. Family did not approve of Edward. They thought he was too focused on money, too disconnected from the things that mattered, but saw something in him that others missed. She saw his heart, buried beneath all the ambition and drive. She believed in him when no one else did. They married a year later in a small ceremony. Edward's career took off shortly after, and he became more successful than he had ever imagined. But through all the wealth and achievements, remained his anchor. She was the one who kept him grounded, who reminded him of what truly mattered in life. She continued to play the piano throughout their marriage, filling the house with music that Edward came to love more than anything else in the world. Even when her arthritis made it painful, she would still sit at the bench every evening and play for him. It was their ritual, their way of staying connected in a world that constantly tried to pull them apart. When the music died with her. Edward could not bear to hear the piano played by anyone else. He considered selling it, donating it, anything to remove the reminder of what he had lost. But in the end, he could not bring himself to do it. The piano was all he had left of her. Maria listened to every word, her heart breaking for this old man who had everything money could buy but had lost the one thing that mattered most. When he finished talking, the room fell silent. The sun had set while he was speaking, and the only light came from a small lamp in the corner. Edward looked at Maria with eyes that seemed to see right through her. He said he had been watching her. He had seen the way she looked at the piano, the longing in her eyes, the way her fingers moved unconsciously whenever she walked past it. He knew she was lying when she said she could not play. Maria felt her blood run cold. Her secret, the one she had buried for over a decade, was threatening to surface. She opened her mouth to deny it again, but the words would not come. Edward reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his frailty. He asked her very softly to please play for him. Maria trembled inside. Her whole body began to shake as memories she had tried so hard to forget came flooding back. The music, the applause, the bright lights, and then the darkness that followed. She felt tears streaming down her face, but she could not stop them. She could not speak. She could barely breathe. Edward did not let go of her hand. He waited patiently, giving her time, giving her space. He understood that he was asking for something difficult, something that went far beyond simply pressing keys on an instrument. He was asking her to face her past. The room grew darker as the night deepened. Maria sat there, trapped between two worlds. The life she had built, carefully constructed to avoid everything that reminded her of who she used to be, was crumbling around her. And the life she had left behind, the one filled with music and dreams and hope, was calling her back. She looked at the piano, its black surface reflecting the dim light from the lamp. It was beautiful, waiting there in the silence, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Just like Edward was waiting, just like she herself had been waiting all these years without even knowing it. Maria took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Maria stood up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She walked toward the piano as if she were walking toward her own execution. Each step brought back another memory, another piece of the life she had tried so desperately to leave behind. Her fingers tingled with anticipation and fear in equal measure. She sat down on the bench, the leather cool against her legs through her thin uniform. The keys stretched out before her, white and black, perfectly ordered exactly as she remembered them. She had spent thousands of hours in front of instruments like this one, practicing until her fingers bled, perfecting every note until it was flawless. Music had been her entire world once. It had been everything. Maria closed her eyes and let her hands hover over the keys. She could feel the ghost of her former self sitting beside her, a young woman full of dreams and talent, a woman who believed that music could change the world. That woman had died a long time ago, or so Maria had told herself. But sitting here now, in this quiet room with a grieving old man watching her, she realized that maybe that woman had only been sleeping. Her fingers touched the keys and the first note rang out into the silence. It was a single note, pure and clear, cutting through the darkness like a beam of light. Maria felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she had built brick by brick over the years beginning to crumble. She played another note, then another, and soon her hands were moving on their own, guided by muscle memory that had never truly faded. The piece she played was Chopin, a nocturne she had learned when she was 16 years old. Her teacher had called it her signature piece, the one that showed her true gift. The melody was sad and beautiful, filled with longing and loss, and as Maria played, she felt herself transported back to another time. She was 16 again, standing backstage at a concert hall, her heart pounding with excitement. Her mother was in the audience, along with her younger brother, who was just a baby then. They had saved for months to buy tickets to see Maria perform in her first major competition. The prize was a full scholarship to the best music conservatory in the country, and Maria wanted it more than she had ever wanted anything. The performance went perfectly. Maria played like she had never played before, pouring her soul into every note. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. She knew in that moment that she had won. Her future was set. She was going to be a concert pianist just like Harrison had been. She was going to travel the world, play in the greatest halls, and share her gift with everyone who would listen. But life had other plans. 2 weeks after the competition, Maria's father died in a construction accident. He had been working overtime, trying to earn extra money for Maria's musical education. A scaffolding collapsed, and he was gone before anyone could save him. Maria's world shattered into a million pieces that day, and no amount of glue could ever put it back together. Without her father's income, the family could not survive. Maria's mother fell into a deep depression, unable to work or care for the children. At 16 years old, Maria became the head of the household. She deferred her scholarship, promising herself she would go back to school when things got better. But things never got better. They only got worse. Maria took any job she could find to support her family. She cleaned houses during the day and waited tables at night. She sold her practice piano, the one her father had bought her for her 10th birthday, to pay for her mother's medical bills. She watched her dreams disappear one by one, like candles being blown out in a strong wind. Years passed. Maria eventually found her way into nursing school through a combination of scholarships and loans. It was practical, stable, and paid well enough to keep her family afloat. She was good at it, too. Caring for others came naturally to her, but music remained locked away in a corner of her heart, a door she refused to open. She had tried to play once, about 5 years after her father's death. A friend had invited her to a party where there was a piano. Maria had sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and immediately broken into tears. The music reminded her too much of everything she had lost. Her father, her dreams, the girl she used to be. She could not separate the joy of playing from the pain of remembering, so she chose to give it up entirely. Now in Edward Harrison's living room, all of those emotions came flooding back. Maria played through her tears, the nocturne building to its climax before slowly fading into silence. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, she was shaking so badly she could hardly breathe. Edward did not say anything for a long moment. He sat in his wheelchair, his face wet with tears, his eyes fixed on Maria with an expression she could not read. The room was completely silent except for the sound of their breathing. Finally, Edward spoke. His voice was rough with emotion, barely more than a whisper. He said that was the most beautiful thing he had heard since died. He said it was exactly how he used to play, with her whole heart, holding nothing back. He asked Maria who she was. He asked what had happened to her. Maria could not answer. The words were stuck in her throat, tangled up with years of grief and suppressed dreams. She stood up from the piano bench and excused herself, practically running from the room. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to be anywhere but here, with this old man who had somehow managed to reach into her soul and pull out everything she had been hiding. She found herself in the garden, surrounded by roses that had probably planted years ago. The night air was cool against her hot face, and she breathed deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. She did not know how long she stood there before she heard wheels rolling across the stone path behind her. Edward had followed her outside. Thomas was pushing his wheelchair, looking worried but saying nothing. Edward motioned for Thomas to leave them alone, and the butler reluctantly into the shadows. Edward told Maria she did not have to explain anything. He said he understood what it was like to have a past too painful to talk about. But he also said that the talent she had just demonstrated was too precious to keep locked away. Music like hers was meant to be shared with the world. Maria shook her head. She told him the world had moved on without her. She was too old now, too out of practice. Whatever dreams she once had were buried with her father. She was a nurse now. That was her life. That was all she could be. Edward disagreed. He said that age meant nothing when it came to talent. He said that being out of practice was a temporary problem, one that could be fixed with time and dedication. He said that dreams never really died. They just went into hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. Maria looked at this old man, this billionaire who had everything and nothing at the same time. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine belief in what he was saying. She also saw something else. She saw herself, reflected back at her, two people broken by loss, trying to find their way back to the light. She asked Edward why he cared. She asked why it mattered to him whether she played the piano or not. She was just his nurse, hired help, someone who would eventually move on to another patient. Why was he investing so much energy in her dreams when he had lost everything that mattered to him? Edward smiled for the first time since Maria had met him. It was a small smile, barely visible in the dim light, but it transformed his face. He looked younger suddenly, less burdened by the weight of his grief. He told her a story about when they were first married. She had gone through a period where she wanted to give up the piano. She felt that her career was holding back his career, that the time she spent practicing was time she could have spent supporting him. She had been ready to sell her piano and never play again. Edward had refused to let her do it. He had told her that her music was part of who she was, as essential as breathing. He had said that if she gave up the piano, she would be giving up a piece of her soul, and he could not bear to watch that happen to someone he loved. Had listened to him. She had kept playing, kept performing, and eventually found a balance between her career and their life together. Edward told Maria that those years of music had been the happiest of his life. Every note played was a gift, not just to him, but to everyone who heard her. Now, Edward said, he had found someone else with the same gift. He had watched Maria for weeks, seen the hunger in her eyes whenever she looked at the piano. He recognized that hunger because had it too. It was the hunger of someone who needed music like others needed food and water. He told Maria he was not asking her to become a concert pianist or change her life overnight. He was simply asking her to play. He was asking her to give herself permission to reconnect with the part of her soul she had been neglecting for so long. He was asking her to stop punishing herself for things that were not her fault. Maria felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack even further. This man, whom she had known for only a few weeks, understood her better than anyone had in years. He saw through all the defenses she had built, all the excuses she had made, all the lies she had told herself about why she could not pursue her dreams. She asked Edward what he wanted in return. In her experience, wealthy people always wanted something. Nothing was ever truly free. There had to be a catch, a string attached, some hidden agenda she was not seeing. Edward looked at her with those sharp, intelligent eyes. He told her he wanted only one thing. He wanted to hear music in his house again. He wanted to feel what he had felt when was alive, that sense of beauty and wonder that made life worth living. He could not play himself. His hands had never been trained for it. But if Maria would play for him, just occasionally, just when she felt ready, it would mean more to him than all the money in the world. Maria stood in the garden, surrounded by roses, and felt something shift inside her. It was not a sudden transformation, not a miraculous healing of all her wounds. It was smaller than that, quieter. It was the first tiny crack of light appearing in a door she had kept locked for over a decade. She did not say yes, she did not promise anything, but she did not say no either. She told Edward she would think about it. She told him she needed time, and for now that was enough. The following days were strange for Maria. She continued her nursing duties, caring for Edward with the same professionalism she had always maintained. But something between them had changed. There was an understanding now, an unspoken connection that went beyond the relationship of patient and caregiver. Maria found herself lingering near the piano whenever she passed through the living room. She would let her fingers brush against the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound, just feeling the smooth ivory beneath her fingertips. The instrument seemed to call to her, whispering promises of redemption and release. One night when Edward was asleep and the house was quiet, Maria crept downstairs and sat at the piano bench. She did not play anything. She just sat there, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes closed, remembering. She thought about her father, about how proud he would have been to see her perform. She thought about her mother, still struggling with depression all these years later. She thought about her brother, now in college, working toward his own dreams. She wondered if it was too late to reclaim what she had lost. She wondered if the music was still there, buried somewhere deep inside her, waiting to be discovered again. She wondered if Edward was right, if dreams never really died, if they just went into hiding. The moonlight streamed through the windows, casting silver shadows across the piano. Maria sat there until dawn began to break, lost in thought, lost in memory, lost in the first stirrings of hope she had felt in years. When the sun finally rose, she made another decision. She would play again. Not for Edward, not for anyone else, but for herself. She would reclaim the part of her soul she had abandoned all those years ago. She would honor her father's memory by refusing to let his death destroy her dreams completely. It would not be easy. The road back would be long and difficult, filled with pain and frustration. But for the first time in over a decade, Maria felt like she had a reason to try. She stood up from the piano bench and walked toward the window. The garden was beautiful in the early morning light, the roses glistening with dew. Somewhere in the house, she could hear Thomas beginning his morning routine. Life was continuing, just as it always did. But for Maria, everything had changed. The weeks that followed were filled with small moments of transformation. Maria began practicing during her lunch breaks when Edward was napping and the house was quiet. At first, her fingers stumbled over notes she once knew by heart. The muscle memory was there, buried beneath years of neglect, but it took time and patience to bring it back to the surface. Edward pretended not to notice the faint sounds drifting up from the living room. Thomas, however, could not hide his surprise when he heard the piano for the first time in 2 years. He stood outside the door, listening with tears in his eyes, transported back to the days when would fill the house with music. When he told Maria what hearing her play meant to him, she felt a warmth spread through her chest that she had almost forgotten existed. Maria started bringing sheet music from the library, pieces she remembered from her competition days mixed with new compositions she had never attempted before. Her skill returned faster than she had expected. The years of rigorous training she had as a teenager had created neural pathways that never fully disappeared. Within a month, she was playing with a fluency that surprised even herself. But technical skill was only part of the equation. The emotional connection to the music, the ability to make listeners feel something profound, that was harder to reclaim. Maria had spent so long building walls around her heart that letting those walls down, even for music, felt dangerous. She would play beautifully for several minutes before suddenly stopping, overwhelmed by emotions she was not ready to process. Edward watched her progress with quiet satisfaction. He never pushed her to play for him directly, understanding that she needed to find her own way back to the music. But he did make changes to his daily routine, asking Thomas to wheel him to the living room during Maria's practice times so he could listen from a distance. Maria knew he was there. She pretended not to notice. One afternoon, Maria was playing a piece by when something unexpected happened. She forgot where she was, who was listening, and all the pain associated with her musical past. For a few glorious minutes, she was simply lost in the music, connected to something larger than herself. When the piece ended, she sat in stunned silence, hardly daring to breathe. Edward wheeled himself into the room. His eyes were bright with emotion, and when he spoke, his voice was stronger than Maria had ever heard it. He told her that used to have moments like that too, moments when the music became everything and the world fell away. He said it was a rare gift, the ability to surrender so completely to art. Maria looked at this man who had become so much more than a patient to her. She asked him to tell her more about their life together, about the woman whose piano she was now playing. She wanted to understand the history of this instrument, to feel connected to the legacy she was carrying forward. Edward smiled and began to speak. He talked for hours that afternoon, sharing stories Maria had never heard. He told her about their first date, how nervous he had been, how had laughed at his attempts to impress her with expensive restaurants. She had said she would rather have a sandwich in the park than a 7-course meal in some stuffy establishment. That was when he knew she was different from anyone he had ever met. He told her about their wedding night, how had found a piano in the hotel lobby and played a private concert for him at 2 in the morning. The staff had complained, other guests had woken up, but neither of them had cared. They were too happy, too full of love to worry about anyone else's opinions. He told her about the difficult years, the times when his business nearly failed and had supported them both with her concert earnings. He told her about the children they had never been able to have, the quiet grief they carried together. He told her about the trips they took around the world, following performances, experiencing cultures and places that Edward would never have seen without her. And he told her about the end. His diagnosis had come suddenly, a rare form of cancer that gave them only months instead of years. She had faced death with the same grace she had shown in everything else, refusing to let fear steal whatever time she had left. She had played the piano every day until her fingers could no longer press the keys, and even then, she had asked Edward to play recordings of her performances so she could hear the music she loved. Her last words to him had been about the piano. She had made him promise never to sell it, never to let it fall silent forever. She had said that someday, someone would come along who needed it as much as she had needed it. She had asked him to wait for that person, and when they arrived, to help them in whatever way he could. Edward looked at Maria with tears streaming down his face. He said he believed she was the person had seen in her final vision. He said the universe had sent Maria to him for a reason, and that reason was bigger than either of them could fully understand. Maria sat beside him, her own tears falling freely now. She told Edward that she did not know if she believed in fate or destiny or any of those grand concepts, but she did know that meeting him had changed her life in ways she was still trying to comprehend. She told him about her father, about the scholarship she had given up, about all the years she had spent running away from who she really was. Edward listened to every word just as Maria had listened to him. When she finished, he took her hand and held it tightly. He said they were the same, the two of them. They were both survivors of loss, both wounded by the past, both trying to find their way back to the light. The difference was that Maria still had time to reclaim her dreams. His time was running out. Maria started to protest, to tell him he still had years ahead of him, but Edward shook his head. He said he knew his own body, knew what the doctors refused to say directly. The stroke had done more damage than anyone wanted to admit. He was not afraid of dying. He had lived a full life, loved a remarkable woman, and built something that would outlast him. His only regret was that he would not be able to see what Maria would become. That conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Maria began playing for Edward every evening after dinner, when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed to pause. She played everything from classical masterpieces to popular songs he'd loved. Sometimes Edward would close his eyes and drift away on the music. Other times he would watch Maria with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. The staff noticed the changes in the household. Thomas remarked that Mr. Harrison seemed more alive than he had been in years. The cook started making special meals to celebrate what she called the musical revival. Even the gardener stopped to listen when Maria's playing drifted through the open windows. Maria's life outside the mansion was changing too. She began reconnecting with people from her musical past, reaching out to old teachers and fellow students she had not spoken to in years. One of her former mentors, a woman named Professor who had helped prepare her for the competition all those years ago, was still teaching at the local conservatory. When Maria contacted her, she immediately insisted on meeting. Their reunion was emotional. Professor had always believed Maria would become one of the great pianists of her generation. She had been devastated when Maria disappeared from the music world, had even tried to find her over the years. When Maria explained what had happened, the professor wept openly and embraced her former student like a long-lost daughter. Professor made Maria an offer she had not expected. The conservatory was hosting its annual showcase in 3 months, featuring both students and alumni performers. She wanted Maria to participate, to show the world that her talent had not disappeared. Maria's first instinct was to refuse. She was not ready for a public performance. She had not played for an audience in over a decade. But then she thought about Edward, about her father, and everything he had sacrificed for her dreams. She thought about all the years she had spent hiding, pretending to be someone she was not. She thought about what it would mean to finally step back into the light. She told Professor she would think about it. The professor smiled knowingly and said that was exactly what she had hoped to hear. Maria did not tell Edward about the offer immediately. She wanted time to process it, to understand what it would mean for her future. But Edward had an uncanny ability to sense when something was on her mind. One evening, after a particularly moving performance of Moonlight Sonata, he asked her what she was thinking about. Maria told him everything. The meeting with Professor, the offer to perform, her fears about stepping back onto a stage after so many years. She admitted that part of her wanted desperately to say yes, while another part was terrified of failing, of proving that she had made the right choice in giving up music all those years ago. Edward listened patiently, as he always did. When she finished, he asked her one simple question. He asked what her father would have wanted her to do. The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She had spent so long trying to survive, trying to take care of her family, that she had stopped asking herself what her father would have wanted. But she knew the answer instantly, without having to think about it. Her father would have wanted her to play. He would have wanted her to share her gift with the world. He would have wanted her to live the dream he had died trying to make possible. Maria made her decision that night. She would perform at the conservatory showcase. She would honor her father's memory, his legacy, and Edward's belief in her. She would stop running and finally face the music. The next 3 months were the most intense of Maria's life. She continued her nursing duties during the day, caring for Edward with the same dedication she had always shown. But every spare moment was devoted to practice, to preparing for the performance that would either launch her comeback or confirm her worst fears. Edward became her unofficial coach and biggest supporter. He listened to her practice for hours, offering encouragement when she stumbled and praise when she succeeded. He shared stories about preparation methods, techniques that had helped her deliver legendary performances. He even arranged for a professional piano tuner to come to the house weekly, ensuring that it was in perfect condition. Thomas and the rest of the staff got swept up in the excitement as well. They would gather outside the living room during practice sessions, whispering among themselves about how beautiful Maria sounded, how proud they were to be witnessing this transformation. The cook started making Maria special meals to keep her energy up. The gardeners brought fresh flowers to place on the piano every morning. As the date of the performance approached, Maria began to feel something she had not felt in years. She felt hope. Not the desperate, fleeting hope of someone trying to survive, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who believes in their own future. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. A week before the showcase, Edward called Maria into his room for a private conversation. His health had been declining recently, the inevitable progression of his condition becoming more apparent each day. But his eyes were bright with purpose as he gestured for her to sit beside him. He had something important to tell her, he said, something he had been planning for weeks but had not found the right moment to share. Maria felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest, unsure what to expect. Edward reached into the drawer beside his bed and pulled out an envelope. It was thick, official-looking, with the letterhead of his personal attorney. He placed it in Maria's hands and told her to open it. Inside, Maria found a document that took her breath away. Edward had established a foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting talented musicians who lacked the financial resources to pursue their dreams. The foundation would provide scholarships, performance opportunities, and mentorship programs for young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. And the first recipient of the foundation's support would be Maria herself. Maria stared at the document, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the paper. Edward had arranged for all of her nursing debts to be paid off, for her mother to receive the best medical care available, for her brother's remaining education to be fully funded. He had also set aside money for Maria to take a year off from nursing to focus entirely on her music, with access to the best teachers and performance opportunities in the country. She looked up at Edward, unable to speak. He smiled at her, that same small smile she had seen on the night in the garden, and told her this was his gift to her. This was what would have wanted. This was how he chose to spend the final chapter of his life, helping someone else write the beginning of theirs. Maria broke down completely. She sobbed in that quiet room, overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief, and a dozen other emotions she could not name. Edward held her hand and let her cry, his own eyes wet with tears of joy. When she finally found her voice, Maria asked him why. Why had he done all of this for her? Why had he invested so much in someone he had only known for a few months? Edward's answer was simple. He said that love was not about how long you knew someone. It was about recognizing something true in another person and choosing to nurture it. Had done that for him all those years ago. Maria had done it for him too, bringing music back into a house that had been silent for far too long. This, he said, was his way of passing the gift forward. The night of the conservatory showcase arrived on a crisp autumn evening. The trees lining the streets had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air carried that particular quality of anticipation that comes with major life events. Maria stood backstage, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. She was wearing a simple black dress, elegant but understated, borrowed from a collection had left behind. Thomas had found it in a closet that had not been opened in years, and when Maria tried it on, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Around her neck hung a delicate silver pendant that Edward had given her that morning, a gift that had belonged to his wife. Professor stood beside her, offering last-minute words of encouragement. The program listed Maria as a returning alumna, a pianist who had once shown extraordinary promise before life circumstances forced her to step away from the stage. The audience would have no idea of the full story behind those clinical words. They would not know about her father, about the years of struggle, about the millionaire who had helped her find her way back to the music. Maria peeked through a gap in the curtain and saw that the auditorium was nearly full. Friends of the conservatory, music lovers from across the city, critics and journalists who came to discover the next generation of talent. Her stomach churned with nervous energy. Among the audience members, Maria spotted her mother and brother sitting in the front row. Her mother looked healthier than she had in years, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. The new treatment Edward had arranged was working wonders. Her brother sat beside her, holding her hand, wearing the suit he had bought for his college graduation. They had both cried when Maria told them about the performance and what it meant for their family's future. There was one person Maria had hoped to see who was not there. Edward had wanted desperately to attend, had fought with his doctors and argued with Thomas about the risk to his health. But in the end, his body had made the decision for him. The day before the showcase, he had suffered a minor cardiac episode that left him too weak to leave his bed. Maria had gone to see him that morning, her heart breaking at how frail he looked. Edward had taken her hand and told her not to worry about him. He said he would be with her in spirit, that would be watching from somewhere beyond, and that the music she was about to share with the world was bigger than any single performance or any individual audience member. Before she left, Edward had asked her to play one more piece for him privately before she played for anyone else. Maria had sat at the instrument that had started all of this and played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece she had chosen for her showcase performance. When she finished, Edward's eyes were closed and a peaceful smile rested on his face. He whispered that would be proud. Now standing backstage, Maria carried that moment with her like a talisman. She thought about all the people who had believed in her over the years. Her father, who had worked himself to exhaustion so she could pursue her dreams. Professor, who had never stopped hopping, she would return to music. Thomas and the household staff, who had become like a second family. Edward, who had seen something in her that she had stopped seeing in herself. And the woman whose piano had brought music back into Maria's life. Maria had never met her, would never know her except through Edward's stories and the instrument she had left behind. But she felt connected to her in a way that explanation, as if their souls recognized each other across the boundary of death. The stage manager signaled that it was time. Maria took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her borrowed dress, and walked out into the lights. The applause that greeted her was polite, the audience curious about this mysterious returning alumna. Maria sat down at the piano, a beautiful concert grand that gleamed under the stage lights. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar coolness against her fingertips. For a moment, she was paralyzed. The memories came rushing back. The last time she had performed on a stage like this, the competition she had won right before her world fell apart. She felt the weight of all those lost years pressing down on her, threatening to crush the fragile hope she had rebuilt. But then she remembered Edward's words. She remembered his legacy. She remembered her father's sacrifice and her mother's love and her brother's unwavering support. She remembered everyone who had ever believed in her, even when she had stopped believing in herself. Maria closed her eyes and began to play. The opening notes of the ballade floated into the silence, delicate and searching, like a question waiting to be answered. Maria let her fingers move without conscious thought, surrendering to the music the way she had learned to do in Edward's living room. The world around her faded away until there was nothing left but the piano, the melody, and the story she was telling through her hands. The piece built slowly, moving through passages of tender beauty and stormy intensity. Maria played her father's memory into the quiet sections, his gentle strength, his unwavering love, his belief that she could achieve anything. She played her years of struggle into the dramatic crescendos, the pain of loss, the exhaustion of surviving, the quiet desperation that had become her constant companion. And in the final passages, she played hope. She played Edward, and in the second chance she had been given. She played the future stretching out before her, uncertain but full of possibility. She played the music itself, the mysterious force that had shaped her life and continued to call to her even when she tried to run away. When the last note faded into silence, Maria sat motionless at the piano, her eyes still closed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She did not know how much time had passed. She did not know if anyone was still in the auditorium or if they had all walked out. Then the applause began. It started slowly, a ripple of sound that grew into a wave, then a flood. People were rising from their seats, clapping and cheering, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. Maria opened her eyes and saw her mother standing in the front row, sobbing openly, her hands pressed against her heart. Her brother was whistling and pumping his fist in the air like they were at a sporting event instead of a concert hall. Professor was standing in the wings, her face transformed by joy and pride. She mouthed the words she had said to Maria so many years ago after that first competition victory. "You have a gift. Never forget that." Maria rose from the piano bench and bowed, her own tears falling freely now. The applause continued, people calling her name, demanding an encore. She played two more pieces, both favorites of Edward's that she had practiced in his living room countless times. When she finally left the stage, her legs were trembling so badly she could barely walk. The reception afterward was a blur of congratulations and business cards and promises to stay in touch. Critics praised her emotional depth and technical precision. Other musicians welcomed her back to the community she had left so long ago. Representatives from concert venues asked about her availability for future performances. Maria accepted all of it with grace and gratitude, but her mind was elsewhere. She needed to get back to Edward. She needed to tell him what had happened, to share this triumph with the person who had made it possible. She said goodbye to her family, promising to call them the next day, and drove to the Harrison mansion as fast as traffic would allow. Thomas met her at the door with an expression that stopped her heart. Edward had passed away 2 hours ago, peacefully in his sleep. The doctors said his heart had simply given out, weakened beyond repair by the stroke and subsequent complications. Thomas told Maria that Edward's last words had been about her. He had asked what time it was, calculated when her performance would be ending, and smiled. Then he closed his eyes and was gone. Maria collapsed into Thomas's arms, overcome by grief. She had known this was coming, had understood that Edward's time was limited. But she had hoped for more. She had hoped he would live to see what his belief in her would become. She had hoped to thank him properly, to show him through years of musical achievements how much his gift had meant. Thomas led her into the living room, to the piano where everything had begun. He told her that Edward had left instructions for this moment. He had known he might not survive to see Maria's performance, and he had prepared accordingly. On the piano bench, Maria found another envelope, this one addressed to her in Edward's shaky handwriting. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photograph showed a young couple, clearly in love, standing in front of a fountain that Maria recognized as the one in the mansion's driveway. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair and bright eyes and a smile that radiated warmth. The man beside her was barely recognizable as Edward, young and handsome and full of life. Written on the back of the photograph was a single line: "The day she agreed to marry me. The happiest day of my life." The letter was longer, several pages written over what must have been weeks or months, Edward's handwriting growing shakier as his health declined. Maria read it through tears, her heart breaking and mending simultaneously with each word. Edward wrote about their life together, about the music that had bound them. He wrote about the emptiness after her death, the way the world had lost all color and meaning. He wrote about meeting Maria, about recognizing in her the same spark he had seen in all those years ago. He wrote about the joy of watching her rediscover her gift, of hearing music fill his house again. And he wrote about his hopes for her future. He urged her to embrace every opportunity that came her way. He asked her to use her talent not just for personal success, but to inspire others who were struggling as she had struggled. He reminded her that music was a bridge between souls, a way of connecting with other human beings that transcended language and culture and time itself. In closing, Edward wrote that he was not afraid to die. He had lived a full life, loved deeply, and accomplished more than he had ever dreamed. His only regret was leaving Maria before he could see what she would become, but he trusted that she would make him proud. He trusted that was already proud, watching from wherever she was. The letter ended with a simple request. Edward asked Maria to play at his funeral if she felt strong enough. He wanted her to play his favorite piece, the same Chopin nocturne she had played on that first night when everything changed. He wanted his last goodbye to include the music that had brought them together. Maria played at the funeral 3 days later. The service was small, attended by close friends and loyal staff members who had known Edward for decades. The weather was gray and overcast, but midway through Maria's performance, a beam of sunlight broke through the clouds and illuminated the piano, as if herself was sending a message. After the service, Thomas handed Maria a set of keys. They were the keys to the mansion, along with legal documents showing that Edward had left the property to her. The piano, the garden, the house filled with memories of, all of it was now Maria's to care for. The staff had been provided for through the estate, their positions secure for as long as they wished to stay. Maria was to be the steward of Edward and his legacy. Maria moved into the mansion the following month. She continued her nursing certification but shifted to part-time work, using the foundation's support to focus primarily on her music. Within a year, she had rebuilt her career to the point where concert invitations were coming faster than she could accept them. True to Edward's wishes, she used her platform to advocate for musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. The Harrison Foundation grew under her guidance, eventually supporting dozens of young artists who might otherwise have fallen through the cracks. Maria spoke openly about her own story, about the years she had lost, about the millionaire who had given her a second chance. She wanted other struggling artists to know that their dreams were not dead, only sleeping. 5 years after Edward's death, Maria stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall, about to perform her most prestigious concert yet. The auditorium was packed with music lovers from around the world, all waiting to hear the pianist whose story had become legendary. Before she began, Maria took a moment to look out at the audience. Her mother was there, healthy and happy, seated next to her brother and his new wife. Thomas had made the trip from the mansion, looking distinguished in a suit had bought for Edward decades ago. Professor sat near the front, her face beaming with pride for the student who had finally fulfilled her potential. And in the front row, occupying seats Maria had specifically reserved, were two photographs. One showed Harrison at her own Carnegie Hall debut, young and radiant and full of music. The other showed Edward, taken at the mansion just weeks before his death, a peaceful smile on his weathered face. Maria placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music rose into the vast space, filling every corner with sound and emotion. She played for her father, who had died believing in her dreams. She played for her mother and brother, who had sacrificed alongside her. She played for Professor and Thomas and all the people who had helped her along the way. But most of all, she played for Edward and the couple whose love story had intersected with hers in ways none of them could have predicted. She played to honor their memory, their generosity, their belief that talent and kindness could change the world. When the concert ended and the standing ovation shook the rafters, Maria bowed and thought about everything that had led her to this moment. A chance job assignment, a silent piano in a lonely mansion, an old man's tears as he listened to her play, a letter written in shaking hands, filled with hope for her future. Life, Maria had learned, rarely followed the path you expected. Dreams died and were reborn in unexpected forms. Loss carved out spaces in your heart that only time and love could fill. And sometimes, when you least expected it, a stranger reached out across the darkness and pulled you back into the light. Walking off that stage, Maria Santos knew exactly what she would do when she returned home. She would sit at the piano, that had started everything, and play one more time. Not for any audience, not for any purpose except to remember. To honor the past while embracing the future. To keep the music alive. Because that, in the end, was what Edward had given her. Not money, though he had given her that too. Not opportunity, though doors had opened that she had never imagined possible. What Edward had really given her was permission to believe in herself again. Permission to chase a dream she had abandoned. Permission to become the person she was always meant to be. As Maria drove through the city streets toward home, the lights of Carnegie Hall fading in her mirror, she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, though she still missed Edward every single day. They were tears of gratitude, of joy, of overwhelming love for everyone who had helped shape her life. The mansion was quiet when she arrived, but it did not feel empty. His presence lingered in every room, in the flowers that still bloomed in her garden, in the books that lined her shelves, in the piano that waited patiently by the window. Edward's presence was there too, in the foundation that bore his name, in the artists whose lives were being transformed, in the letter Maria kept framed on her bedroom wall. She sat down at the piano and began to play the Chopin Nocturne, the piece that had changed everything. The notes floated through the darkened house, filling the silence with beauty and memory and love. Somewhere, Maria liked to believe, Edward and were listening together, holding hands, smiling at the music that had brought them all together. The poor nurse who had once trembled at the thought of touching a piano had become a world-renowned artist, a philanthropist, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt their dreams were out of reach. It was a transformation that seemed impossible, the kind of thing that only happened in stories. But Maria knew better. She knew that miracles were not supernatural events, that explanation. They were simply moments of grace, opportunities seized, connections made between human beings who chose to see the best in each other. Edward had chosen to see the best in her, had left behind an instrument that could bring that best to life, and Maria had finally found the courage to accept what they were offering. That was the real story, not the concerts or the foundation or the mansion or the money. The real story was about love, given freely and received gratefully, passing from person to person like music itself, creating harmony where there had been silence. Maria finished playing and sat quietly in the moonlit room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new performances, new opportunities to pay forward the gifts she had received. But tonight, she simply wanted to remember, to be grateful, to let the music speak for everything that words could never express. She closed the piano lid gently, ran her fingers across its polished surface one last time, and went to bed with a peaceful heart. They waited in the darkness, patient and ready, holding the echoes of all the songs that had ever been played upon it. Songs, Maria's songs, and perhaps someday the songs of musicians yet to come, drawn to this instrument by a story they had heard, a legacy they wanted to continue. Music never really ended, Maria had learned. It simply transformed, flowing from one life into another, connecting strangers across time and circumstance. Edward had understood that, had lived it, and now Maria carried it forward note by note, heart to heart, until the melody passed to someone new. That was the promise she had made to Edward on the night he died. That was the gift she offered to the world with every performance. That was the truth she would spend the rest of her life sharing. Music was not about perfection or fame or wealth. Music was about connection. It was about finding your voice and having the courage to let others hear it. It was about believing that beauty could emerge from pain and that broken dreams could be rebuilt into something even more magnificent than what was lost. The millionaire had asked a poor nurse to play the piano, and she had trembled inside. But the trembling had transformed into triumph, and the story that followed would inspire generations to come. In the quiet mansion, surrounded by memories and moonlight, Maria Santos slept the peaceful sleep of someone who had finally come home.